Sometimes the most dangerous battles aren't fought on enemy lines, they're fought in silence, behind closed doors, where uniforms can't protect and rank means nothing. When Sarah Martinez walked into Colonel Davidson's office that cold December morning, her hands trembling as she saluted, she never imagined that her request for emergency leave would be met with cruel laughter. The colonel's eyes narrowed as he dismissed her excuses with a wave of his hand, calling her weak, unreliable, just another soldier trying to get out of duty. But what Colonel Davidson couldn't see beneath Sarah's perfectly pressed uniform were the purple bruises covering her ribs, the finger-shaped marks around her throat, and the cast hidden under her long sleeves, evidence of a war she'd been fighting at home for months. He couldn't hear the desperation in her voice or understand that her life hung in the balance of his decision. What happened next would shake the entire military base, challenge everything they thought they knew about the soldiers under their command, and prove that sometimes the enemy lives much closer to home than anyone wants to admit. This is the true story of courage, survival, and the moment when laughter turned to horror, and dismissal became a fight for justice that would change everything. Sarah Martinez had always been the kind of soldier others looked up to. At 28, she had already earned 2 commendations for her work as a communications specialist at Fort Henderson. Her record was spotless, her dedication unwavering, and her smile could light up the entire barracks during the darkest training exercises. But, as she stood outside Colonel Davidson's office that December morning, her usual confidence had crumbled into something barely recognizable. The hallway felt endless as she waited for permission to enter. Other soldiers walked by, some nodding respectfully, others too busy with their own duties to notice the way her hands shook or how she kept adjusting her sleeves to make sure they covered her wrists completely. Sarah had practiced her speech 100 times in the mirror that morning, but now the words felt foreign in her mouth. When the gruff voice called for her to enter, Sarah took a deep breath and stepped inside. Colonel Davidson sat behind his massive oak desk, his gray hair perfectly styled, his uniform immaculate. At 55, he was a career military man who had seen 3 deployments and had little patience for what he considered weakness. His reputation for being tough but fair had earned him respect throughout the base, but today, fairness would be tested in ways no one expected. Sarah saluted sharply, her training taking over despite her nervousness. "Colonel Davidson, sir." Sergeant Martinez reporting as requested. "At ease, Martinez." The colonel barely looked up from his paperwork. "I understand you're requesting emergency leave. 30 days, effective immediately." His tone was already skeptical, and Sarah felt her heart sink. "Yes, sir. I need to take care of some urgent family matters back home in Texas." The lie felt heavy on her tongue, but the truth felt impossible to speak. Colonel Davidson finally raised his eyes to meet hers, and Sarah saw the familiar look of annoyance that appeared whenever he felt his time was being wasted. "Family matters," he repeated, his voice dripping with suspicion. "Martinez, you've been one of my most reliable communications specialists. Your unit is preparing for a major training exercise next month, and you're telling me you need to abandon your post for family matters?" Sarah's mouth went dry. She had hoped her clean record would work in her favor, but, instead, it seemed to be making the colonel more suspicious. "Sir, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't absolutely necessary. I've never requested emergency leave before, and I understand the timing isn't ideal, but nothing, Sergeant." The colonel leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "Let me guess. Someone's sick? A grandmother, perhaps? Or maybe there's some family drama that suddenly can't wait another month until your scheduled leave?" The dismissive tone in his voice made Sarah's chest tighten. She could feel tears threatening to form, but she fought them back with every ounce of military training she possessed. "Sir, with respect, this is a legitimate emergency situation that requires my immediate attention." Colonel Davidson laughed then, a harsh sound that echoed off the office walls. "Emergency situation? Martinez, I've been in the military for 30 years. I've seen every excuse in the book. Soldiers who suddenly discovered dying relatives right before deployment, family emergencies that mysteriously resolve themselves the moment leave is denied." He stood up, walking around his desk to face her directly. "What I see in front of me is a soldier trying to avoid her responsibilities." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't going at all like she had hoped. "Colonel, I assure you this isn't about avoiding responsibilities. I've served faithfully for 6 years without incident." Which is exactly why this sudden request seems so suspicious. The colonel's voice grew harder. "You want me to believe that someone with your record, someone who has never shown the slightest sign of weakness or unreliability, suddenly has a family emergency so urgent that she needs to abandon her unit right before a critical training exercise?" The room fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Every instinct told her to tell him the truth, to show him what was hidden beneath her carefully arranged uniform, to explain that the emergency wasn't her family, it was her life. But the shame was too deep, the fear too overwhelming. "Sir, I'm requesting leave under emergency provisions. I have the paperwork completed and ready for your signature." She reached into her jacket pocket, trying to keep her movements steady despite the pain that shot through her ribs. "Paperwork?" Colonel Davidson's laugh returned, even more mocking than before. "You think paperwork is going to convince me to let you walk away from your duties? Martinez, I'm disappointed in you. I thought you were made of stronger stuff." The word stronger hit Sarah like a physical blow. If only he knew how much strength it had taken just to make it to his office that morning. If only he could understand the courage it required to get out of bed each day, to put on her uniform, to pretend that everything was normal while her world was falling apart at home. "Colonel, please. I'm not trying to avoid anything. I'm asking for help." The words came out more desperate than she intended, and she immediately regretted letting her composed mask slip. "Help?" The colonel's expression grew cold. "Sergeant, the military isn't a charity organization. We don't hand out 30-day vacations because soldiers suddenly develop personal problems. If you can't handle your personal life and your military duties simultaneously, then maybe you need to reconsider your career choice." Sarah felt something inside her chest crack. This man, who she had respected and served under for 2 years, was essentially calling her weak, unreliable, unfit for service. And the worst part was that she couldn't defend herself without revealing secrets that felt too dangerous to share. "Sir, I've never given you any reason to doubt my commitment to my duties or my unit. I'm asking for emergency leave because I have no other options. I wouldn't be here if there was any other way." "No other options?" Colonel Davidson returned to his seat, his demeanor suggesting the conversation was nearly over. "Martinez, let me be very clear. Your request for emergency leave is denied. You're needed here, and I won't have soldiers thinking they can walk away from their responsibilities whenever life gets a little complicated." The finality in his voice made Sarah's knees feel weak. She had gambled everything on this conversation, had hoped that her record and reputation would be enough to secure the leave she desperately needed. Now, standing in this office with her request denied and her character questioned, she felt more trapped than ever. "Colonel, if I could just explain the specific circumstances." "The circumstances are irrelevant, Sergeant." He picked up his pen, clearly ready to move on to other business. "You have your answer. Report to your unit tomorrow morning for the pre-exercise briefing." Dismissed. Sarah stood there for a moment, frozen between the urge to tell him everything and the fear of what might happen if she did. The bruises under her uniform seemed to throb with renewed intensity, reminding her of why she was really there, why she needed to get away, why 30 days might literally mean the difference between life and death. But Colonel Davidson had already returned to his paperwork, effectively erasing her presence from his attention. With nothing left to say and nowhere else to turn, Sarah saluted one final time. "Understood, sir." As she turned to leave, Sarah caught her reflection in the window behind the colonel's desk. For just a moment, she saw herself as she really was, not the strong, reliable soldier everyone believed her to be, but a woman trapped between two impossible situations, desperately trying to survive both. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Sarah found herself back in the hallway where this nightmare had begun. Other soldiers continued their daily routines around her, unaware that one of their own was drowning in plain sight. The emergency leave that was supposed to save her life had been denied with cruel laughter, and now she would have to find another way to survive what was waiting for her at home. But Sarah Martinez was stronger than anyone knew, including herself. And, sometimes, when the system fails to protect those who serve, the only option left is to protect yourself, no matter what it takes or who gets hurt in the process. What she didn't know as she walked down that hallway was that Colonel Davidson's decision would soon come back to haunt him in ways he never imagined. Sometimes the truth has a way of revealing itself, even when those in power try their best to ignore it. And, when it does, the consequences can be more devastating than anyone ever expected. 3 days after Colonel Davidson denied her emergency leave request, Sarah Martinez barely made it through the base gates. Her left eye was swollen shut, her lip was split, and she walked with a careful, measured pace that spoke of hidden injuries. She had called in sick the previous day, using one of her precious few sick days, but she knew she couldn't avoid returning to duty any longer without raising questions she wasn't ready to answer. The drive to base that morning had been agony, both physical and emotional. Every turn of the steering wheel sent sharp pains through her fractured ribs, and the bruises on her back pressed against the car seat like a constant reminder of Tuesday night's violence. But the emotional pain was worse. Marcus, her husband of 4 years, had been apologetic afterward, as he always was. He had brought her ice for her eye, had promised it would never happen again, had blamed the stress of his job and his drinking and a dozen other things that were never his fault. Sarah had heard it all before. The cycle was as predictable as it was devastating. The tension would build over days or weeks, small incidents that seemed manageable, words that cut but didn't leave visible marks. Then would come the explosion, usually triggered by something trivial, like dinner being 5 minutes late or Sarah forgetting to pick up his dry cleaning. The violence would be swift and brutal, followed by tears, apologies, and promises that never lasted more than a few weeks. This time had been different, though. This time, Marcus had hit her with a fury that scared even him. Sarah had seen it in his eyes afterward, a moment of genuine shock at what he had done. But, instead of that fear translating into real change, it had only made him more desperate to keep her from leaving, more determined to control every aspect of her life. As Sarah signed in at the base security checkpoint, the guard did a double take at her appearance. Sergeant Williams had known Sarah for 2 years, had always exchanged friendly greetings with her, and the sight of her battered face clearly shocked him. "Jesus, Martinez. What happened to you?" His voice was filled with concern, and, for a moment, Sarah felt the overwhelming urge to tell him everything. "Car accident," she said instead, the lie coming easier now after 3 days of practice. "Hit a patch of ice on Sunday night, slammed into a tree. Lucky to be alive, really." Sergeant Williams frowned, clearly not entirely convinced. "Did you file a report? Need any assistance with insurance or anything like that?" "Already taken care of, thanks. Just need to get back to work and keep busy, you know." Sarah forced a smile despite the pain it caused her split lip. The guard nodded reluctantly and waved her through, but she could feel his eyes on her as she walked toward the communications building. Word would spread quickly, it always did on a base this size. By noon, half the base would have heard that Martinez had been in some kind of accident over the weekend. Sarah's first stop was the medical bay. She needed to have her injuries officially documented, if only to provide some cover for her obvious physical condition. The base medic, Lieutenant Thompson, was a kind woman in her 40s who had served as both medic and unofficial counselor to dozens of soldiers over her 15-year career. "Good morning, Sergeant Martinez. I understand you were in an automobile accident?" Lieutenant Thompson's professional demeanor couldn't quite hide her concern as she took in Sarah's injuries. "Yes, ma'am. Sunday evening. I've been treating most of it at home, but I wanted to make sure there wasn't anything serious I was missing." The examination was thorough and painful. Lieutenant Thompson documented each injury with clinical precision, but her questions grew more pointed as the examination continued. "These bruises on your ribs, the pattern is interesting. Usually, in car accidents, we see more linear bruising from the seatbelt, maybe some steering wheel impact. These look more like," she paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. "These look like they might have come from a different kind of impact." Sarah's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. "The car rolled twice after hitting the tree. I was thrown around pretty badly inside the cab before the seatbelt could do its job." Lieutenant Thompson nodded slowly, but her eyes remained skeptical.
And this bruising around your throat? That's also unusual for a car accident. I think that happened when the seatbelt caught me during one of the rolls. Everything happened so fast, it's hard to remember exactly what hit where.
For a long moment, the two women stared at each other.
Sarah could see that Lieutenant Thompson didn't believe her story, could see the internal struggle playing out across the medic's face.
But, without Sarah's admission, there was little the lieutenant could do beyond document the injuries and hope that the soldier in front of her would eventually trust someone enough to tell the truth.
"Sergeant Martinez," Lieutenant Thompson said finally, her voice gentle but firm. "I want you to know that if you ever need someone to talk to about anything, and I mean anything, my door is always open."
Sometimes soldiers face challenges that have nothing to do with military service, and there's no shame in asking for help. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but she blinked them back.
"I appreciate that, ma'am. Really. But I'm fine. Just need some time to heal up from the accident." The medical examination concluded with Lieutenant Thompson prescribing pain medication and recommending light duty for the next week.
As Sarah left the medical bay, she felt both relief and frustration. Relief that she had managed to maintain her cover story, frustration that she had let another opportunity to ask for help slip away. But the hardest part of the day was yet to come. Sarah's unit was scheduled for a briefing at 1400 hours, which meant she would have to face her fellow soldiers and, more importantly, her commanding officer. The communications unit was tight-knit, and everyone knew everyone else's business. There would be questions, concern, and scrutiny that she wasn't sure she could handle in her current state. When she entered the communications building, the first person she encountered was Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, her immediate supervisor and one of the few people on base she considered a real friend. Rodriguez took one look at Sarah's face and immediately pulled her aside.
"Holy hell, Martinez. What happened to you?"
Rodriguez's voice was low but urgent.
"Car accident Sunday night. Hit some ice, went off the road. Could have been a lot worse, really."
The story was becoming smoother with each telling, but it still felt like swallowing glass.
"Jesus. Are you okay? Should you even be here today? You look like you should be in a hospital bed, not reporting for duty."
Sarah appreciated Rodriguez's concern, but it also made maintaining her facade more difficult.
"I'm fine, really. A little sore, but nothing that won't heal. The medic cleared me for light duty."
Rodriguez studied her face for a long moment, and Sarah could see the same skepticism she had encountered with Lieutenant Thompson. Rodriguez had 3 daughters and a wife he adored, and he had strong opinions about men who hurt women. If he suspected the truth about Sarah's injuries, there would be serious consequences for everyone involved. "Martinez, if you need anything, and I mean anything, you just have to ask.
You know that, right?
The unit takes care of its own."
"I know. And I appreciate it more than you know. But right now, I just need to get back to normal routine and let my body heal." The afternoon briefing was torture.
Sarah had to sit in a room with 15 other soldiers, all of whom kept stealing glances at her battered face. Colonel Davidson was present to oversee the briefing, and when his eyes fell on Sarah, she saw a moment of genuine surprise followed by something that might have been concern. After the briefing, as the other soldiers filed out, Colonel Davidson approached her.
"Sergeant Martinez. I heard you were in some kind of accident over the weekend. Are you fit for duty?"
Sarah stood at attention despite the pain it caused her ribs.
"Yes, sir. Medical has cleared me for light duty pending full recovery."
The colonel studied her face, taking in the swollen eye, the split lip, the careful way she held herself. For just a moment, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of regret cross his features, as if he was remembering their conversation from the previous weekend, wondering if there might have been more to her emergency leave request than he had realized.
"Good. Take care of yourself, Martinez. The unit needs you at full strength."
As he walked away, Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of her wanted to call out to him, to explain that the family emergency she had mentioned wasn't about her family of origin, it was about the family she was trapped in now. But the moment passed, and, once again, she found herself keeping her secrets locked away. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks and concerned questions from colleagues.
By 1700 hours, Sarah was exhausted in every possible way.
The physical pain was manageable with medication, but the emotional strain of maintaining her cover story while surrounded by people who cared about her was overwhelming. As she prepared to leave the base that evening, Sarah sat in her car for several minutes, dreading the drive home. Marcus would be there, probably sober and apologetic, probably with flowers or takeout from her favorite restaurant. He would be the model husband for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, and she would start to believe that maybe this time was different, that maybe he really had learned his lesson.
But, deep down, Sarah knew better.
The cycle would continue, the violence would escalate, and, eventually, someone would get seriously hurt or worse. As she started her car and drove through the base gates, she made a silent promise to herself. She would find a way out, with or without the help of the military system that had already failed her once. She just had to survive long enough to make it happen. What Sarah didn't know was that her story was already beginning to unravel. Lieutenant Thompson had documented her suspicions in Sarah's medical file, Rodriguez had started asking questions about the nature of her accident, and Colonel Davidson was beginning to remember details from their conversation that hadn't seemed important at the time. Sometimes the truth has momentum of its own, and, once it starts moving, it becomes almost impossible to stop. The breaking point came 2 weeks after Sarah's return to duty, on a Thursday evening that started like any other but ended with everything changed forever. Sarah had been feeling cautiously optimistic. Marcus had been on his best behavior since the incident that left her with visible injuries, and she was beginning to heal both physically and emotionally. The bruises had faded to yellow and green shadows, her ribs no longer screamed in protest with every breath, and she had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were getting better. She should have known better. The trigger was something completely insignificant. Sarah had forgotten to pick up Marcus's favorite beer on her way home from base. It was such a small thing, the kind of oversight that happens to everyone. But, for Marcus, who had been holding back his anger and resentment for 2 weeks, it was enough to unleash the fury he had been bottling up.
You can't even remember one simple thing?
His voice was quiet at first, the dangerous kind of quiet that Sarah had learned to fear more than shouting.
I ask you for one thing, Sarah. One thing. Pick up beer on your way home. How hard is that? Sarah immediately went into damage control mode, the survival instincts she had developed over months of walking on eggshells kicking into high gear.
I'm sorry, Marcus. It was a long day, and I just forgot.
I can go back out and get it right now.
You forgot. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just like you forgot to do the laundry last week. Just like you forgot to pay the electric bill on time.
You know what I think, Sarah? I think you're doing this on purpose. That's not true. You know it's not true.
I would never, don't you dare lie to me.
The explosion came without warning.
Marcus backhanded her across the face with enough force to send her stumbling backward into the kitchen counter.
I'm sick of your excuses.
I'm sick of your incompetence. I work all day to provide for us, and you can't even handle the simple responsibilities of being a wife. Sarah tasted blood in her mouth, felt the familiar sting of split skin and the promise of bruises to come.
But, this time, something was different.
This time, instead of cowering or apologizing or trying to de-escalate the situation, she felt a surge of anger that surprised her.
Stop it, Marcus. Just stop.
Her voice was steady, stronger than she felt.
This isn't about beer. This isn't about laundry or electric bills. This is about you not being able to control your temper.
The words seemed to hang in the air between them, and Sarah immediately realized she had made a terrible mistake. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, rage, and then something cold and calculating that scared her more than his anger ever had.
Control my temper?
His voice was whisper-soft now.
You think I have a temper problem, Sarah?
Let me show you what a real temper problem looks like. What happened next was the worst beating Sarah had ever endured.
Marcus seemed to lose all restraint, all awareness of consequences or limits. He hit her with his fists, with objects, with a fury that seemed to come from some deep, dark place in his soul. Sarah tried to protect herself, tried to get away, but he was bigger and stronger and completely out of control. At some point during the assault, Sarah's vision started to fade around the edges. She could feel herself losing consciousness, could sense that this time was different from all the others. This time, Marcus might actually kill her. It was that realization that gave her the strength to do something she had never done before. As Marcus paused to catch his breath, standing over her broken body with bloodied knuckles, Sarah managed to reach into her pocket and dial 911. 911, what's your emergency?
Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, but the dispatcher heard her.
Help me. My husband is beating me. I think he's going to kill me.
Marcus heard the voice from the phone and went into a panic. He grabbed the phone from Sarah's hand and threw it against the wall, shattering it into pieces.
But it was too late.
The call had been made, the address had been traced, and help was on the way. The next 20 minutes were a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and uniformed officers. Marcus was arrested despite his protests and claims that Sarah had provoked him. Sarah was rushed to the civilian hospital, where doctors documented injuries that were far worse than anything she had tried to hide before. But the most significant moment came when the police called Fort Henderson to inform them that one of their soldiers had been hospitalized as the victim of domestic violence. The call went to the duty officer, who immediately contacted Colonel Davidson at home. Colonel Davidson arrived at the hospital just after midnight, still in his civilian clothes, his face grim with an expression Sarah had never seen before. When he walked into her hospital room and saw her lying there, face swollen beyond recognition, multiple fractures, internal bleeding, the color drained from his face completely. "Dear God," he whispered, and Sarah could see his hands shaking as he took in the extent of her injuries. Lieutenant Thompson was also there, having been called in to coordinate Sarah's medical care between the civilian hospital and the base medical facilities. When Colonel Davidson arrived, she pulled him aside for a conversation that would haunt him for years to come. "Colonel, I need you to know that this isn't the first time I've seen injuries like this on Sergeant Martinez. 2 weeks ago, she came to my office with what she claimed were injuries from a car accident. But I documented my suspicions in her file that the injuries were inconsistent with her story."
Colonel Davidson felt his stomach drop. "What are you saying, Lieutenant?"
"I'm saying that Sergeant Martinez has been living with domestic violence for some time, and she tried to hide it from us."
"Colonel, do you remember her requesting emergency leave recently?"
The question hit Colonel Davidson like a physical blow. Suddenly, Sarah's desperate request, her trembling hands, her obvious distress all made horrible sense. She hadn't been trying to avoid her duties or take an unauthorized vacation. She had been trying to save her life. "Oh God," he whispered. "She asked for emergency leave 3 weeks ago.
I denied it. I laughed at her.
I called her weak and unreliable."
Lieutenant Thompson's expression softened with sympathy, but her words were firm.
"Colonel, with respect, we failed one of our soldiers when she needed us most. The question now is what we're going to do to make sure this never happens again." Colonel Davidson spent the rest of the night at the hospital, waiting for Sarah to regain consciousness, waiting for a chance to apologize, to make things right. When she finally woke up the next morning, her first words were an apology.
"Colonel, I'm sorry. I know this reflects poorly on the unit. I should have handled things better."
Colonel Davidson had to turn away for a moment to compose himself. When he turned back, his eyes were red with unshed tears. "Sergeant Martinez, I owe you an apology. When you came to me asking for emergency leave, you were asking for help, and I failed you. I failed you as your commanding officer and as a human being. I am deeply, deeply sorry." Sarah stared at him in surprise. In all her years of military service, she had never heard a superior officer apologize to a subordinate with such raw emotion and sincerity.
"Sir, you couldn't have known I should have known.
The signs were there, and I chose to ignore them because it was easier than dealing with the complicated reality of what you were facing."
That ends now.
Over the following days, Fort Henderson underwent a complete transformation in how they handled domestic violence cases.
Colonel Davidson personally instituted new policies for recognizing and responding to domestic abuse among military personnel.
He brought in civilian counselors, established safe houses, created a confidential reporting system, and made it clear that domestic violence would be treated with the same seriousness as any other threat to military readiness.
Sarah's recovery was long and difficult, both physically and emotionally.
Marcus was prosecuted to the full extent of the law and sentenced to 5 years in prison for aggravated assault. The divorce proceedings were swift and final, with the Military Legal Assistance Office providing Sarah with top-notch representation at no cost. But, perhaps the most significant change was in Sarah herself. The woman who had once hidden her pain behind a perfect military facade became an advocate for other victims of domestic violence. She started a support group on base, worked with civilian organizations to provide resources and safe havens, and used her own story to help others find the courage to seek help before it was too late.
Colonel Davidson never forgot the lessons Sarah Martinez taught him.
Years later, when he was promoted to general and given command of a much larger installation, the first policy he implemented was comprehensive domestic violence prevention and response protocols. He often told other commanders about the soldier who asked for help and was met with laughter, and how that laughter nearly cost a good woman her life. The scar above Sarah's left eyebrow never completely faded, a permanent reminder of the night everything changed. But she came to see it not as a mark of shame or victimization, but as a symbol of survival, of the strength it takes to ask for help, and of the importance of believing people when they trust you with their truth. Sarah Martinez served 12 more years in the military, eventually reaching the rank of Master Sergeant. She retired with full honors and a chest full of medals, but the achievement she was most proud of wasn't any commendation or award. It was the dozens of soldiers, both men and women, who approached her over the years to thank her for giving them the courage to speak up, to ask for help, to believe that they deserved better than living in fear. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not against foreign enemies, but against the darkness that can exist in our own homes and hearts. And sometimes, survival isn't just about making it through another day, it's about having the courage to believe that you deserve a life free from fear, and that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, but the first step toward reclaiming your power. Colonel Davidson kept a photo on his desk for the rest of his military career, not of a battle or a ceremony, but of Sarah Martinez at her retirement ceremony, surrounded by the soldiers she had helped save. Every time he looked at it, he remembered the day he learned that sometimes the enemy doesn't wear a uniform, and that the most important mission any leader can undertake is protecting those who serve under their command, not just from foreign threats, but from the dangers that hide in plain sight. The story of Sarah Martinez and Colonel Davidson became legendary at Fort Henderson, not because it was a tale of heroism in combat, but because it was a story of what happens when people choose to do better, to listen more carefully, and to believe that everyone deserves to be safe in their own home. It was a reminder that true strength isn't about enduring suffering in silence, it's about finding the courage to speak your truth and the wisdom to help others find theirs.